Good morning to everyone here in Sydney and across the globe. Thank you for taking the time today to come along either in person or joining us via Blue Jeans WebEx webcast. My name's Andrew Keys and I'm your host today. To kick things off this morning, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Are You OK Day is a very special day. It is a day to remind ourselves about the reality of mental wellbeing issues encountered by our friends, our family, our colleagues, or ourselves every day, no matter where we are. It is with great pleasure today that I introduce you to Graeme Cowan. Anybody watched the ABC News last night would have seen Graeme on that, and Graeme had a very, very busy day yesterday. Graeme helps leaders and teams to be more caring, resilient and growth-oriented. In his early career, he worked in senior leadership positions with Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer and A.T. Kearney. In 2000, Graeme went through a 5-year episode of depression that his psychiatrist described as the worst he had ever treated. He emerged from this crisis with a different view about how we can increase our resilience, our mood and performance. He's described by the Australian Financial Review as a workplace mental wellbeing expert. Author of 4 books, including the internationally acclaimed Back from the Brink, which has a testimonial from the former UK Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Blair, and which has become a bestseller in China. He attributes his writing prowess to religiously reading every single edition of Rugby League Week when he was in Year 12. That's cool. Graeme has also helped to start Are You OK in 2009, and he is an active board director. Please welcome Graeme.
Former world heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson was many things, but we don't often think of him as a wise philosopher. But he once said, everyone has a plan until we get punched in the face. And it's true, isn't it? We can start the day with our to-do list, but we have an email or a phone call and it goes out the window. And to be honest, that's more to be expected. It's not that happens, the punch, but it's how we respond. And that's why resilience is a really important quality for us personally, for our workplace, but also for our families. And I want to really share about, 7 rituals of building that resilience. We often just think we want to be resilient, we want to be growth-oriented. But I hope that you really go away today understanding that care is the foundation for resilience, and that is the foundation for growth. Self-care isn't selfish, and I really want to stress that and what we can all do to apply self-care, not just for us, of course, but also for those around us. I think it's really helpful to have a concept or a model to think about resilience. And I use the moodometer. I went to see a psychiatrist for a long time, about 10 years. I told him he should be giving me frequent flyer points, so regular. But one of the things he always asked me was to rate my mood, 0 to 10. And I asked him why he did that. And what he said was, well, for one thing, it's really good for me to understand where you are. But I also believe that you should be able to manage your mood and maybe even master it. And I was a bit taken back. I said, haven't I got a clinical illness? And he said, well, yes, you do. You've had 5 major episodes of depression. You have a predisposition. But I believe that you and everyone else should be able to learn how to manage your mood and maybe even master it. Now, it's interesting. You look at the green zone. In the green zone, I think we know that we are better people. We're better parents. We're better friends. We're better workmates. And it's also really self-evident from research that's been published in Harvard Business Review that when we are in the green zone, we are 31% more productive, 37% more influential, and 300% more creative. This is all essential qualities for thriving in this environment. The red zone is really expensive and it's not very nice. I've spent a bit of time in the red and a little bit of time well, hopefully a lot more time in the green now. And it's much better to be in the green. So are we just victims of how we wake up or victims of events that happen to us? What is the key to the green zone? There's a psychology professor called Sonia Lyubomirsky. She comes from California. She wrote a book called The How of Happiness. And she has looked at 400 peer-reviewed studies that look at mood, or what psychologists call positive affect. And she determined that there's actually 3 main contributors to our mood. And that comes down to our genetics, the events that happen in our lives, and the actions we take each day. So the events, the genetics, and the actions we take each day. So what do you think is the major contributor out of those 3? Just a quick 45-second chat with your colleague about what you think is the major contributor out of those 3. So it's genetics, events, action. What do you think is the biggest contributor to our mood out of those 3? 45 seconds to have a chat with your colleague. All right, so those things again, genetics, events, actions. You've had that talk. So on balance, I just want you to vote for yourselves. Who would say on balance they think their genetics is the biggest contributor? No, one taker. Who would say it's the events that happen in our lives? Yeah, about 30%. And who would say it's the daily actions, our intentional actions? That's about 40%. Well, in fact, the right answer is our genetics. Our genetics, we've got one bold and courageous answer up the back there, but you're right. Our genetics contribute 50% of our well-being and resilience. Some people are just born more robust than others. But I think the really heartening thing is that 40% of our well-being, of our mood, is determined by our intentional actions, what we choose to do each day, and only 10% by the events that happen in our lives. So I want to share today and really focus on the things that we can do, tangible things we can do, rituals we can put in place for self-care, because that's the only thing we have control over. And I want to just share some ways that we can incorporate things that keep us in the green zone. So how did I get involved in talking about mood and resilience? Well, basically it was through not coping very well. As Andrew indicated in the introduction, I went through, when I was in a work role, it was when the great tech crash happened, which was back in 2000. Many of you won't remember that, but I certainly do, because the business I was in, it collapsed overnight. So massive disruption to the market that I was focusing on. I was working in executive search, focusing on that segment. And in a very, very short period of time, I lost my job. My marriage broke down, and I had to go and live with my parents. And I'm not sure if there's any Seinfeld fans here, but I felt a little bit like George Costanza. But to be honest, I wouldn't have made it without them. Their support was really, really, really central. They encouraged me when I lost faith in myself. They believed in me when I'd forgotten what it was like even to be well again. And their support was just critical. That led to me writing a series of books, the Back from the Brink book series. And funnily enough, my first book was 12 years ago, and it was launched by John Brogden, the former opposition leader here in New South Wales. And John's been a big supporter of Are You OK? And as you know, he had his own mental health crisis, or some of you may know, he had his own mental health crisis. And it's interesting, inside that book and inside 2 of my other books, I included my suicide note, July 24, 2004. And I was 100% convinced, or really 110% convinced, that I would never get better again. I'd been through I thought I'd tried everything. And it's interesting, as I said, it's been in the public domain for a long time. But 3 days ago, you may be aware that it was World Suicide Prevention Day. And I decided to share it on LinkedIn. And this was the note that I put on LinkedIn, and I put a bit of a background blurb. But essentially what I was wanting to say was that this was 15 years ago, and I now have a really fulfilling life, a really good life. And I wanted to let people know that we're going through that sort of pain, that sort of trauma, that is possible and probable if you take the right actions. And I said in this post, just take one step today. Call your doctor, make an appointment. Call a helpline. Call the employee assistance program. Just one step. And then I also said, for those that are in good shape, keep an eye on those people around you. Our theme this year for Are You OK? The whole theme this year has been trust the signs, trust your gut, and ask, are you okay? And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So to cut a long story short, it just went viral. And in a very, very short period of time, it had like 70,000 views, hits, shares all over the world. And it was I thought it was just really interesting. 99.999% of the comments were 100% positive. They said, we just have to talk about this. We have to be more open about this, because when we are, we can do something about it. And funnily enough, on Wednesday, I was driving home from an event I had at Landcom, and which ironically is where John Brogden is now the CEO. So it was a very serendipitous little thing. And I had a call from an ABC journalist, and he'd heard about it, and he then wrote a story. And he wrote a story about me sharing my note, and then if you Google, Graeme Cowan suicide note, you'll see, it's just been shared extraordinarily, which I never knew that was going to happen. You just never know, do you? You just never know in this sort of digital space what will land and what won't. But I think it is really pivotal, and I think it is that we are at a tipping point for being more open, more honest about this. But also, I think what was really, really gratifying for me is a lot of the response was from men. And if you don't know, men account for 75% of suicides, and they're very poor at seeking help. And so I really hope there's a groundswell of men and the women that support them that, it's okay to say, I'm not okay. So through my books, I got to meet Gavin Larkin in 2009. And Gavin had tragically lost his father to suicide. And he just had this idea. And it was a very disruptive idea. He wasn't going to start a National Suicide Prevention Day. He had this concept of, are you okay? And the brilliant tagline that a conversation could change a life. So we had no employees, we had no money, we had a lot of pro bono support. But we started and launched it that year in Canberra when Nicola Roxon was the health minister. And it's just magnificent to see how much it has grown. We now have an 82% awareness rate in Australia. Close to 30% of people have asked, are you okay? But also, we've also found out that during the year, up to 40% of Australians wish someone asked, are you okay, but they didn't. So we often, as I said, we get our punches in the face, and it could be twice a year, it could be 3 times a year. So we just need to be aware and to look for the signs and ask, are you okay? So getting back to self-care, because ultimately we are much better off to stay in the green zone. I know from first-hand experience that it's a long, slow road to get out of the red zone. And we can do it, but it's much, much easier to stay in the green zone. It's why I'm so passionate about building really caring and resilient and supportive teams, because that is the key to being able to survive. We had just an amazing event yesterday at Barangaroo, where the whole Are You OK team came together, and there was literally 10 people that worked for Are You OK? 10 full-time people. But they just rock. They're the highest. I'm just so proud of Catherine Newton and the whole team. The impact they have, and it's largely because we started from a digital core. We're always a digital operation. So what's the most important part of self-care? There's a bit of a poster from an old movie. Anyone recognise it? Anyone? A bit of an old classic movie? For those who don't know, it's a movie called City Slickers. Anyone seen that? Yeah? It's about 20 years old, but it's you might find it even on Netflix or Stan. But so what it's about 3 burnt-out middle-aged men approaching their 40th birthday, lost their mojo, hate their work, their families are all dysfunctional, and they decide they're going to get their mojo back by going on this cattle drove in, I think it's Montana in the US. So they go out there and they're just hopeless. They're hopeless camping, hopeless with horses, hopeless with cattle. But on the cattle drove is this crusty character called Curly, the head cowboy. And Curly is just, really present. He has this bearing, and if anything goes wrong, he just sorts it out. He's just the master of the land. And at one stage, one of the city slickers, played by Mitch, Billy Crystal, gets separated with Curly. And as they're, riding along, he says, "What's your secret, Curly? You're just on top of things. Your life makes sense. You bring the cattle home. Everything, makes sense. I hate my work. My boss hates me. My wife hates me. What's your secret?" And Curly says, he does this. He says, "What, your finger?" He said, "No, just one thing." "What is that one thing? What is that one thing?" And Curly says, "Well, that's what you have to find out. But if you find out what it is and you look after that, everything takes care of itself." Now, believe it or not, about 7 years ago, I was asked by the then CEO of Medibank Private, George Savides, to go on a cattle drove in outback Queensland with him and his executive leadership team. And I'd always loved this movie, so I was very keen to go along. I watched this movie again, and this is a scene that really struck me. And it was, and the reason the cattle drove was raising funds for mental health services because they'd had a lot of droughts, and it's, here we are 7 years later, it's exactly the same. And there was a lot of mental health issues in the community, especially in rural areas. And my role was to do some talks along the way, do some radio interviews, but also facilitate a discussion with the leadership group that had come. And we're on the cattle drove, and I was just thinking about what is my one thing. And one thing that I've been just really disciplined about since my recovery from the breakdown was getting up early and meditating. I get up about 5 a.m. every morning, and then I usually do some exercise, either a walk in the national park. We lived up here in Gordon on the North Shore, right beside the national park, which is lovely. We'll go to the gym. And so I thought, well, for my one thing, it's probably, meditation or exercise or nature. But as I reflected a bit more, I thought, well, for me, it's probably meditation. Because if I do that, it does automatically lead to the exercise, leads to coming back in a good mood and planning the day and having a good day. So at the end of the cattle drove, we're all sitting around in a circle, and I repeated the Curly story and told what I thought my one thing was. And I asked them, and I think it was a unique situation because we'd had, I think it was 4 days with no mobile coverage, no internet, nothing. And pretty quickly, people came up with an answer. One person said, when my relationship with my wife is good, everything else is good. Happy wife, happy life. Someone else said, when I have quality time with my 7-year-old daughter, that's my one thing. Someone else said, I go for 2 1.5-hour bike rides a week, and that just, sets me up for the rest of the week. Now, I've asked this in hundreds of forums, really, around Australia, around the world, and it never ceases to amaze me what people come up with, what they do when they're really present, and that can then lead to good things that follow. I've had a Burley coal miner say singing in the choir 3 times a week. I've had a woman who works in a bank in North Sydney say getting a little tinny by herself, going 10 k's out to sea and fishing. That was her one thing. I've had people say, when I come home from work, I water the garden. And that's my segue between work and home. I've had people say walking their dogs in the morning. I've had people say my birds. I feed my birds in the morning, and when I'm with that, I'm just really present. I've had the CEO of an agricultural company say chainsaw carving. Chainsaw carving. I guess you've got to be pretty present to be doing that. But what about you? What do you do when you're really present? What do you do that when you do it, it makes all the difference and leads to other things? For some people, I tend to find that it often falls into 3 categories. And one of those categories is around exercise. Who would say that theirs is around exercise? Yeah, quite a few. Good number there. Who would say it's more around family and friends? Yeah, quite a few of those as well. And then there's a third area, which is a little bit more interesting, hobbies or that sort of thing. Who would say theirs is a hobby or something along those lines? Yeah, great. I had someone on Wednesday, a woman, say that hers is pole dancing. So whatever it is, it doesn't matter. That's the unique thing. It's your one thing. It's your one thing. So when you reflect on that one thing, who would say, on balance, that they do their one thing enough? Just raise your hand if you do your one thing enough. About 10% of the audience. Who would say they don't do it enough? Well, hopefully there's a wake-up call. I didn't ask for your number 10 thing. I asked for your number 1 thing. And it's just too important to leave this to chance. And I'm going to be talking at the end about putting rituals in place to help make this happen. But you certainly can't ignore your one thing. We must live it. And the only way we live it is to have it scheduled in our diary. It doesn't mean that we do it every single time, but it should be a default in your diary. It should be an appointment with yourself to do something that is incredibly important to your well-being. I want to talk now about just a bit more generally around self-care and just reinforce the message that self-care isn't selfish. So it tends to fall into 3 glasses. 3 glasses of water. Just think of the metaphor of 3 glasses of water. And so these glasses sitting outside. And what happens when there's water outside in a glass? What happens? It evaporates. And that's like our well-being as well. We have a certain amount, but if we don't do something to add to it, it evaporates. So what are the 3 areas of well-being? The first thing is vitality, which is our physical well-being, our physical health. So this is, good exercise, good sleep, good rest, and good nutrition. The next one is intimacy. And this is our emotional energy, our emotional resilience. This is having people around us that support us. And the third glass is prosperity. And this is our contribution energy. This is the energy we get by helping others. And this could be in our career, it could be in working for charity, it could be volunteering for a school or a cause that you really relate to. But each of these areas are important. We must systematically work our way and apply these things in these areas. Now, I have something called a self-care VIP snapshot. And this is just a quick way to diagnose which is your full cups and which is your emptiest cups. And after this, we'll organise to share this with you digitally. But it just allows you to really understand where's the area you should be focusing on. Is it in my physical health? Is it around my relationships? Or is it around my contribution energy? Because that should be the clue of something to focus on. Because everything I share today won't be that new. There might be a bit of nuance in terms of how I present it, but a lot of it will just make common sense to you because it is common sense. But if knowledge was the solution, we'd all be billionaires and have six packs, wouldn't we? So it's not about knowing what's good for us, but it's actually choosing to put rituals in place that makes it happen almost automatically. So this is the V, or the vitality area. And, moving well or exercise. Mayo Clinic research tells us that if we have just a 30-minute brisk walk, our mood is better 2 hours later, 4 hours later, up to 12 hours later. Who's a regular walker here? Excellent, excellent. Who's got a dog? Are they also the walkers? I don't know if you know this, but it's been shown that people that own dogs are actually fitter than those that have gym memberships. They just do it more regularly. So, just moving regularly is really important. And see, 30 minutes. We can always fit 30 minutes in the day, whether it's, before work or at lunchtime or after work, or just taking a break to do that. The second part is about resting well. And last year I did research on my database and asked them, what are your biggest mood vampires? What are the biggest things that push you down the moodometer? And the number one thing, guess what, was not enough sleep. And I also happen to know that that's one of the most visited parts of the Telstra Wellbeing portal. So it's obviously you're not immune from it. So it's the recognition that it is an issue and the recognition that of deciding to take action on it. And if that is something you want to pursue, we'll talk about that when I get to the end of my presentation. So the second glass is intimacy or emotional energy. Who has people during the week that suck the life out of them? Yeah? Some people are putting 2 hands up. No shortage of them, is there? But what about those that are good for us? What about those that when we spend time with them, we feel better about ourselves? Are we dedicating enough time to them? Are we ensuring that we have enough time with those people? Because at AOK, we refer to these as scaffolding. When the storm comes, when the punch in the face comes, these are our scaffolding when things go wrong. And these could be work friends, they could be, partner, spouse, they could be, personal friends. It doesn't really matter. But I think what's really interesting to remember is that the longest wellbeing study ever done is something called the Harvard Grant Study. And you can Google it, there's a TED talk about it. They've been following the same group, about 250 people, for over 75 years. They've got terabytes of information. They interview them every year. There's now only about 15 alive because they're like 95. But from all that information, they have one compelling conclusion. And that is the best predictor of a long life, a healthy life, an affluent life, and the longest sex life is having caring and supportive relationships. So if we aspire to those things that I just mentioned, this isn't a nice to have. It's about how we put it into action. And I asked, I had a forum, I was actually with NAB in Melbourne a year or two ago, but I asked people, does anyone have anything in place to help make that happen? And this woman pulled out her purse, pulled out a card, she had 7 names on it. And she said, I look at that every Sunday. These are my special crew, and I go through it. And if I haven't got anything in the week ahead, I set up a coffee or a movie or whatever with that group of people. We can't leave it to chance. I'm very fortunate to have 2 pretty amazing parents. As I said, they were an amazing support to me when I was really, really unwell. I wouldn't be here, quite frankly, if they weren't around. Alan and Judy Cowan, 63 years of marriage. Now, John Gottman and Julie Gottman specialise in studying long-term successful intimate relationships. And it doesn't matter whether they're heterosexual, homosexual, or whatever. It doesn't matter. And he really looks at what is the secret behind these successful long-term relationships. They became famous through Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. And in there is a story about how they can see a couple discussing an issue for 15 minutes and predict with 91% certainty whether they'll be together in 10 years' time. So that's their gig. And they have this thing called the Love Lab, where they look at, what masters do versus the disasters. And the funny thing is that the masters and the disasters fight about the same amount. It's not as if, it's all bliss and harmony and kumbaya with the masters. It's not. But they do things differently. And what do you think separates the masters from the disasters? Any clues you want to call out? Yeah, see your actions with best of intention. That's that's exactly on the right track. Any other thoughts? What they found is the number one predictor of the masters is they respond to bids. And what that means is that, if a couple is, for example, on a balcony looking at the harbour, and one says, wow, look at that beautiful boat. And the other one looks up and says, wow, that is lovely. Wouldn't it be nice to go on that trip there? That's responding to a bid versus grunting and still looking at your phone. Responding to bids. It sounds really simple, but they found in this Love Lab, and they watch people 24/7 in this Love Lab. It's like a Airbnb, which is monitored 24/7. They found that the masters respond to bid 86% of the time versus 33% time of the disasters. There's two other things that the masters do differently. They celebrate each other's wins. It's even more important than commiserating, hardships and setbacks. They celebrate each other's wins. And the third thing is that they play the ball, not the person, which is a little bit like that comment there. They look at the best intention with others. So what that means is that if there's something that isn't happening, they talk about the issue and don't denigrate the character of their partner. So if someone is not taking the rubbish out or along those lines, you don't say, well, you're a lazy so-and-so. You just try and understand why it's not happening and talk about the issue. The masters aren't perfect, but, they certainly have a really, really great life. The next thing is really having your own care crew. And as I said, these are people around you that have your best interests at heart. These are people that you're happy to support, and to be honest, you really appreciate their support as well. I've been since my recovery for about 10 years, but 2 years ago, which was actually in the lead up to Are You OK? I had a setback. But because I had really nurtured friends, and this is a very good friend, Ted Dorisami, I've known for 30 years. We first worked at Johnson & Johnson. I was, able to tell people, and I was able to cut back on commitments and just say to people, I was literally able to call 6 people and say, look, I'm really struggling. If you want to help, ask me to go for a walk. And so the walk has really been a really central part of my well-being, and having people in my life like that is important. So who are the people that are in your care crew? So as you look at those two questions, that one statement, who comes to mind? Who comes to mind? Do you spend enough time with them? If you don't, as I mentioned at the start, the Harvard Grant Study says, if you want those 4 things, long life, healthy life, affluent life, long sex life, make time for people that are good for you and make them a priority. My wife, Karen, and I, have a really busy life, and we recently walked the Larapinta on a fundraising walk for Are You OK? Just a magic experience. And that's something we do like to do in our holidays, is just have indistractable time together, or quality time or indistractable time. Because in this really distracted world, having those close and supportive relationships with the person around you is really important. You can also have, really good discussions. Of course, we still get grumpy with each other, but we also know each other's one thing. And I'd encourage you to find out, if you don't, your partners, your friends, your kids, your workmates, one thing, because it's a really caring thing to do. And so if you're both grumpy, we're grumpy for each other, I can say, well, my one thing, as I mentioned, is meditation. My wife, Karen, loves to run trails. She's running a marathon this Sunday, but she loves running trails. And so I can say, if things are not going that great, I can say, why don't you go for a run, darling? Why don't you hit the track? And she said, I will if you meditate for 3 hours. But it shows, it shows you care. You have a language that is meaningful to the other person. The third part is prosperity. This is our contribution energy. This is our, it can happen in our work and charity life or whatever. This has been amazing. Each year we wonder, can Are You OK get better? Can it get bigger? And each year it blows us away. This year we decided to up the merchandise we had by 50%. We sold out 3 days before this week. So it's just grown bigger. This last week, we were very fortunate to be welcomed by the Governor-General, David Hurley, and his wife, Linda. Amazing people, just really down to earth. He was formerly Chief of Defence, and previously Governor of New South Wales. And what I thought was interesting was having a chat with him. And here's the one on your left. And I must admit, I really hadn't thought much about the Governor-General's role. But what he said that was an important part for him was thanking Australians for making the country better. And I must admit, we felt pretty special being with him. He was very present. He was very in the moment. And then he shared something which I thought was very, very interesting. He said that he was previously Governor of New South Wales and he was attending some natural disaster. He came in, went around and spoke to some people. He and his wife went and spoke to people, and he was about to go, and he was sort of apologising to people. And this woman said, don't apologise. You're the carer-in-chief. You're the one who has to get around a lot of stuff. And he said that was an incredibly telling thing for he and his wife. In fact, he's only been in the role for 2 months, but he's decided to make that the cornerstone of the role they're going to do. That's their real focus. How can we be the carer-in-chief? But he said to me privately, as a former general and head of the Defence Force, I don't want you telling anyone about this. So Chatham rules apply. Chatham House rules apply. But I think it is a really interesting, this is the highest office in the land. He's managed a defence force of tens of thousands of people. And at this stage of his career, he's convinced that the number one priority for getting things done is to be the carer-in-chief. Actually, I've got a very interesting anecdote about Telstra as well. I happened to give the RUA talk for Telstra last year, and I was down in Melbourne, gave the talk, and then I had a meeting with Matt O'Hara, and Matt looks after all the external field people. And we were just catching up on a few things. I ended up doing a webinar for his field team. But we were walking to the lifts, and it was a Friday afternoon, like today. It was the afternoon, and we went down in the lifts, and it was really, really packed. And we were up the back, and we heard two guys just in front of us talking about, an employee that wasn't doing their best. And one person said to the other, have you asked them, are you okay? And I just thought, that's just magic, gave him a real nudge and said, how good is that, mate? How good is that? Another person I met last week, the woman there is Catherine Newton, and she's our CEO. It's her first year as CEO. She was campaign director before. She's just done the most unbelievable job over the last 8 weeks, just extraordinary. But the person she's there with is Matt Flavell, and Matt is the Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth Treasury. So a pretty senior role. He reports directly to the equivalent of the CEO. And Matt welcomed us there and just stressed about how important asking, are you okay, how important it is to have meaningful conversations. But then he said, shared two things. He shared about when he'd asked someone, "Are you okay?" But then, even more impressively, as a senior leader, he shared when people had asked him, "Are you okay?" And it happened to be a very difficult year personally for him the previous year. He didn't go into details, but he just mentioned that. And he said, it just makes the most huge difference that people regularly looked out for him. But it wasn't just the words. He said, someone noticed that he was losing weight and they started buying him lunch each day. So the Are You OK culture isn't just about asking the question, it's the whole ethos, it's the whole spirit. I want to share another amazing hero. Like I've shared two senior leaders that have lived and breathed this. This legend is a guy called Mustafa Karush. Now, do you think that he lives and breathes Are You OK? He ran the city to surf in that, if you can believe it. But he also works for Sydney Rail. And they have 12,000 employees, 80% male, very blokey. But Mustafa, he's a work health safety consultant. But he took it on himself that he was going to work out how to embed Are You OK in this culture. And what he observed was that in the lunchrooms and stuff, the blokes would talk about footy. And so he decided that his segue into their world was putting things around barbecues and footy. So he'd set up these events where they'd have passing competitions. They'd have companion dogs. They'd have, footy players come along and talk. But then he'd just sort of start to slip in bits about mental health. That was 4 years ago. 4 years later, Mustafa did a roadshow for Sydney Rail. He had 6,500 people attend Are You OK seminars out of 12,000. So to change a culture, it's not just top down. We need champions all over. And I really hope that some of you decide that you'd like to really take initiative in this and just see how can I apply an Are You OK culture to my team? How can I do it to my team? What role can I do there? So how do we support a teammate in distress? With my most recent, or second last book, I actually asked over 4,000 people, what helped you bounce back best? What helped you to recover? And it basically came up with an acronym called I Care. Wesley research tells us that 81% of us know someone close to us that lives with depression, anxiety, bipolar, or substance abuse problem. So who here knows someone close to you that lives with that? Excellent. And it's the same in every single audience I speak to. And yet when you're going through it, you feel really alone. When you're trying to help someone go through it, and Andrew and I have had discussions about this before today, you feel really alone. But as you can see, it affects all of us. So when you think about the person that you just put your hand up for, how do you know when they're not having a good time? How do you know? They withdraw. That's a huge one. Social isolation, often, really withdrawal. There can be changes in behaviour. Sometimes they turn up for work late. They can be dishevelled. They can be moodier than normal. So they're the signs. And as I said, this was the theme for this year. Trust the signs, trust your gut, ask, are you okay? So the first step, I, is to identify. And so it is looking for those changes, those signs. The second step is compassion. C is for compassion. That's putting ourselves in their shoes. It's asking, are you okay? And often the best way to do that is being shoulder to shoulder. I'm not sure why, but often, walking in a park, being shoulder to shoulder is when really good conversations happen. Any of us have had kids, know that when you're driving somewhere with kids, where everyone's just looking ahead, the things that come out of kids' mouths when you're driving is pretty amazing. And we're like that as well. We're just more comfortable sometimes not looking, just, being ahead. So that's a good thing. So make the observation at the change of behaviour, ask, are you okay? Next one is to encourage them to access experts. So it could be to see their GP. It could be to call a helpline. It could be to, call the Employee Assistance Program, which Telstra has. It could be to do an anonymous self-test on the Black Dog Institute website or Beyond Blue website. Just take one step. R is for revitalising work, and it's not always well known, but work is actually good for our recovery. We're better off being at work, being connected with our work colleagues, than being at home, staring at a wall or staring at the ceiling. And so sometimes it might mean cutting back in hours or cutting back in duties, but on balance, we're better off having people at work than at home. So revitalising work. And then the final part, not surprisingly, is E is for exercise. And as you remember, with Mayo Clinic research, just a 30-minute walk boosts our mood for up to 12 hours later. So it's interesting, when we started Are You OK, the two big reasons why people don't ask in the workplace, number one is they don't know how to start the conversation. And number two is they're worried that people may not have the answer, or they're worried that people will say, no, I'm not okay, and not know how to help. So earlier this year, this is a poster which also just covers each of those 4 steps in a bit more detail, and we'll make sure that each of that is circulated to you, along with a short video that explains each of those 5 steps. But if digital is part of the issue, and it is, digital disruption is part of the issue. CSIRO has said that in the next 20 years, that rising work stress and mental health issues is one of the top 6 mega trends, which is going to thump productivity. So if we want a successful workplace, we have to be open about this. We have to be able to discuss it. But I think also digital is part of the solution. And one thing that I've just been involved with recently is thinking about how do we scale people's capacity to help better? And we did a series of trials with Ernst & Young. I formed a new social enterprise called Factor C, and we put together this program called We Care. It's a 20-minute program. We did trials with Ernst & Young and also the University of Sydney. People that did the 20-minute course said they were 94% more comfortable asking someone, are you okay, and knowing how to help. And they had a net promoter score of 96%. So I think this is part of the solution, is how we learn things and apply them. And the thing that it also has is a whole series of resources that you can refer to. So if you have someone that you want to help, you can quickly go back and have a sheet there, how to have an Are You OK conversation. If they don't know how to find a mental health savvy GP, there's a resource to show them how to do that. If they don't know how to have a mental health discussion, the resource you can print off and email to them. So although digital, has lots of upsides, it has some challenges, but it's also part of the solution. The other really important part of wellbeing is having a sense of purpose, and it's way too much to cover this here. I do 2-hour sessions to help people to write the first draft of their purpose. But a real clue, and as I said, it's takes two hours to tease this out. But a real clue is asking people, when you think about your career, what has been your career highlight? Of everything you've done, what have you personally found most rewarding? And it's incredibly interesting what people nominate. And then we start trying to pick that and say, okay, what were you doing? What were you doing? Next question is, who are you helping? And then third question is, how are those people benefiting from that help? And then we have people do the first draft. Having a sense of purpose is a critical element in thriving in really volatile times. Probably the most volatile period we ever had, or one group ever had, was the Holocaust. And Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychiatrist, was imprisoned in the Holocaust. And he decided to observe what was the difference between those that made it and those that didn't. And only 1 in 28 made it. And overall, it was those that made it had a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. And he ended up writing a book. He got out of, when the war was over, he got out and he wrote that book in 6 days. The book's called Man's Search for Meaning. And the US Library of Congress, the largest library in the world, rates it one of the top 10 books of all time. So having a sense of purpose. So how do we know if we're living our purpose? Well, I think it comes down to whether we feel successful. And this is, I think, the ultimate definition of success. Marvelous American poet Maya Angelou, who's unfortunately passed. But success is liking yourself, liking what you do, liking how you do it. And I think just asking ourselves that each week, on the weekends, I think about the last week, did I like myself? Did I like what I did? Did I like how I did it? Out of 10, each of those. If you don't like the answer, hit refresh. We hit refresh for our computers, but what about our lives? If we don't like how we've spent the last week, how can we change it next week? Too important not to. So, as I said, that's the 3 components. And I'd like you to act like VIPs. What that means is making a commitment to top up each of those 3 cups every day. It doesn't have to be big things. And rituals are the prequel to the green zone. 40% of what we do every day, according to Duke University, is because of our rituals or habits. We buy coffee at the same place, we drive the same place, we brush our teeth the same place. There's good reasons for that. But are they the right habits? Are they green zone habits? So these are some of the really 7 what I think are critical skills. Not surprisingly, number 1 is living with one thing. You just nominated one thing that was the most important thing in your life, and probably 80% has said you're not doing it enough. I hope that's a wake-up call. Second thing is to refuel daily. Just getting that 30 minutes of brisk walk, getting good night's sleep. Nurture self. This is making time for our care crew. People that help keep us in the green zone. Play to strengths. Understand and know your strengths. People that use their top 5 strengths every day are 600% more likely to be engaged in their work and 300% more likely to report high life satisfaction. Having a mindset of progress is better than perfection. When things are changing, we often dwell on what's going wrong. But how can we focus on the little things that are going right? Asking, are you okay? We started Are You Okay to help those in distress. What we know now is that it helps just as much the person asking. There's this thing called helpers high. And we actually benefit, our own well-being benefits by asking someone, are you okay? And I guess finally, just being true to myself. Do I like myself? Do I like how I'm doing it? Do I like what I'm doing, like how I do it? So again, we'll be able to share this poster with you. There's something called, a book I read called The Slight Edge. It's a very interesting book in that it was this sleeper, it was self-published. And he talks about, for big changes to happen, it's not big changes you make, it's little things. Little consistent things that happen every day. And what's really interesting, he shares, had multiple editions, and there's examples of how people have recovered from horrific injuries, how they've turned around from financial ruin, how they've got fitter. And it's little consistent things. There are many habits or ritual apps out there. One that I've found particularly helpful is one called Streaks. And it's about $5 in either the Android or the Apple Store, and allows you to nominate and put in what are your rituals, what are your micro rituals each day. And these are things that are important to me. But you need to choose your own rituals, and it's got a really nice interface. When you do it each day, you put your finger on that, like your thumb on there, and it does this big circle. So of course, it's unrealistic to think we can do each of these 7 days a week. But if we strive for 5 out of 7, that's a great place to be. So we started by talking about, the punches in the face that happen and how we cope with that. That is our life, that is disruption, it is only going to get faster. I'm absolutely convinced that if we want to thrive in that area, we need to be caring, and that's a self-care, and caring for our teammates and caring for our family. We need to be helpful, and we need to go for the growth zone. And that's trying new things, going outside your comfort zone, Because the riskiest thing we can do is to keep doing exactly what we've always done. Thank you.
Thank you, Graeme. What a story. What a session. Graeme's story has got me thinking very deeply about many things. I'm sure there's lots of emotions you've gone through today. If you're human, there would be many, many. I know two very special people that I'm going to call today and check in. My father and my daughter. I promise that I will do that today. In closing, please remember, if you're feeling that someone you know or care that isn't behaving as they normally would, perhaps they seem out of sorts, more agitated or withdrawn, or they're just not themselves, take the time to check in. Ask them, are you okay? By starting that conversation, you could help a family member, a friend or workmate open up. You don't have to be an expert to check in. You don't have to fix the problem. Just connect, show them you care, and encourage them to reach out for support. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation today. Thank you so much, Graeme. Awesome.
And if anyone has something they'd like to discuss privately, it could be a loved one you're really concerned about, and you just like to have a few ideas. I'm happy to hang around as long as it takes. If anyone would like to just have that chat, so the offer's there.
What an opportunity. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.